Chosen but Free. More than any other book I have read in recent memory, this one made me sad. It made me more and more depressed with each passing page, which is a response I would have never predicted on a book on God's election and man's free will as it relates to our eternal salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. I wasn't depressed by Geisler's writing, mind you. I really wish he hadn't gone to glory so I could interview him and discuss this book with him. I found it to be very reasonable and well written throughout. Even the places where I disagreed with Geisler, I understood his reasoning, I liked how he explained himself, and I could easily say, yeah, I agree to disagree on that. And I'm not a Calvinist in any way. I don't believe in any of the 5 points of TULIP, but I could totally converse with or even attend church at a Calvinist like Norman Gesier. What made me sad while reading this book is how far over the last 25 to 50 years Calvinism has drifted away from the reasonableness of men such as Norman Gesier and Louis Sperry Chafer to the unreasonableness of Calvinists like Sproul and Piper. Calvinism has solidified itself behind the likenesses of Piper and White to the point that the most scathing reviews against Norman Geisler's book are those from inside his own camp, the reviews of other Calvinists. He constantly referred to John Piper or John Owen, their wing of the Calvinist party, as the extreme Calvinist view. But really, in my lifetime, it is the standard Calvinist view. And the views of men like Geisler and what we find in his writings are the minority in the Calvinist camp to the point where they have practically been run out of the movement. Geisler presents a view of election where every person who believes in salvation was chosen. They were elected by God before the foundation of the earth to believe in Jesus, but no one is elected who also did not freely consent to believe in Jesus. God did not need to regenerate someone so they can believe. He didn't need to irresistibly coerce and drag man to him in order for them to believe, but he wooed them freely by his grace. The strength of this book is in Geisler's skill at presenting some very complex issues in ways that are easily understandable and digestible for the average reader. I don't believe anyone who is interested in the subject of election or free will will discover this book to be filled with pointless theology which fails to touch upon the issues at hand, or a book that bypasses the difficult issues on this subject. Geisler presents one of the best arguments I have read so far against limited atonement to show why this teaching is both absent in Scripture and also contrary to the very nature of God himself. The Calvinist teaching that I have always personally found to be the most challenging in understanding how they arrive at is the teaching of regeneration before faith. And Geisler does a superb job in this book to show how Scripture is consistent to present faith leading us to regeneration and not regeneration to bring about faith. And so we don't need to be born again in order to believe in Jesus for his gospel. So I would say that this book seems like it's just an internal writing of one Calvinist writing against other Calvinists, but I would say that even if you're not a Calvinist, there's a lot to glean from this book. So much so that I would guess that the vast majority of Calvinists today would not even count Norman Geisler as one of their numbers, as one of their neighbors, since he provides so many good counter-arguments against the claims and faulty logic of standard Calvinism, which is what Geisler refers to as extreme Calvinism. My biggest knock in this book was Geisler's use of sovereignty. He used the term sovereignty with the standard meaning that we find in most of the church today. Norman Gesier writes, "A God who is before all things, beyond all things, knows all things, and can do all things, is also in control of all things. This complete control is called the sovereignty of God." The sovereignty of God should not be twisted to mean that God is controlling all things, including the finger of the man who is about to pull the trigger on the gun, or the lips of the woman who is spewing out words of hateful gossip behind the back of one of her friends. God is ruling over all things, and since he is before all things, since he is beyond all things, since he knows all things, God is passing judgment on all of his creation as the sovereign. But he is not directing all things with absolute deterministic control. Geisler presented numerous biblical passages in order to try to prove God's complete control in pages 26 and 27 of the third edition. And all of those passages that Geisler brought up that he says prove that God controls all things, they don't actually show that God is controlling all things. Those passages simply show that God does whatever he pleases. And doing whatever you please is not the same as forcing every single person and thing to do exactly what you want them to do at all times. And I honestly think that if Norman Geisler could have corrected his view on sovereignty, maybe he could have left Calvinism altogether. Since the way that Geisler explains and understands the 5 points of TULIP, to me, in every single point, he explains them and understands them in a non-Calvinist way. So I think this is a very helpful book to combat the fatalistic claims of what I'm just going to call standard Calvinism. But in the end, this book just made me kind of sad, because I wish that Geisler, instead of James White, would have received more support amongst their Calvinistic peers, which would have resulted with more people in the church having wisdom, compassion, and understanding from a more accurate view of the Bible that Norman Geisler has in comparison to someone like James White. But I believe that anyone can find something to learn by reading Chosen But Free by Norman Geisler. But if you've enjoyed this review and you want to continue to receive more reviews on the wonderful world of Christian literature, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Rev Reads YouTube channel.